The Shapeshifter. On Sunday, when most children were spending a comfortable night at home, Billy Raven roamed the dark passages and empty grounds of Bloor's Academy. The only other child in the building was Manfred Bloor, but he was now 18, hardly a child, and at weekends he shut himself away in the West Wing with his father and old Ezekiel, his great-grandfather. Sometimes, if Billy gave Manfred an interesting piece of news, something about Charlie Bone, for instance, Manfred would reward him with a bar of chocolate, and if he did what Mr. Ezekiel asked, the ancient man would give Billy a late-night mug of cocoa. Today, it was Billy's 8th birthday, but so far, no one had remembered. Last year, Cook had made him a cake, but the Bloors had let the day pass without so much as a happy birthday, Billy. You might wonder how Billy knew it was his birthday after all. No one had spoken of it since he was a year old. Billy knew the date because it was fixed firmly in his mind. He knew because the animals knew, and they had told him. Billy was a baby when his parents died. He was brought up by an aunt who was kind but strict. When Billy was 2, a beautiful cake had arrived in the post. The aunt's dog ate it, candles and all. For this, the dog was beaten, and so was the cat, for good measure. On the 4th of May, when Billy was 3, the dog and the cat said, "Cake Day, Billy," but no cake arrived. The same thing happened when Billy was 4 and 5, but this time, out of the aunt's hearing, Billy and the animals had been having long conversations. When Billy turned 6, he said to the aunt, "Am I going to get a cake today?" The aunt said, "Who told you it was your birthday?" "The dog and cat," said Billy. The aunt gaped at him. At last she said, "You can talk to the animals then." "Oh, yes," said Billy, thinking that this was something everyone could do. "I talk to them a lot." The aunt said no more to that, but the very next week, Billy was sent to Bloor's Academy. He felt lonely in the dark, massive building. He kept getting lost, and he began to think that people were trying to keep things from him. They didn't want him to know who he really was. Cook was kind, though, and he often talked to the dog, Blessed, an old fat creature with a hairless tail. He might have been ugly, but Billy loved him all the same. The old dog always had time to listen to him. Last term, Billy had kicked Blessed. He didn't mean to. It had just happened, and Billy regretted it bitterly. Blessed wouldn't tell him something he badly wanted to know, and he'd lost his temper. Now Blessed wouldn't speak to him, and there was only the mice and occasional rat to talk to. Mice were boring. They were only interested in food and babies. Rats were better. Mr. Boldova had a rat that told jokes. Its name was Rembrandt. Today Mr. Boldova had taken Rembrandt for a walk. Billy wondered where they had gone. Hopping for a treat of some kind, he began to make his way to the top of the West Wing, where Ezekiel lived. The old man had a huge musty room crammed with ancient stuff, urns and pots, bones and swords, and jars full of dead things. Mr. Ezekiel was a magician, but not a very good one. Billy had just reached the top of a rickety staircase when he heard a scream. He peered down the long gaslit passage that led to Mr. Ezekiel's room. Something was coming towards him, a short, fat dog howling its head off. "Blessed," Billy grunted in the dog's language. "What's the matter?" "Tail, tail," cried Blessed. "Tail hurt." The old dog rushed up to Billy. "Can you see?" it begged. Blessed used to have an ugly bald tail. What he had today was even worse. A tiny pink stub stuck out from his bottom. Not much of a tail left, said Billy. What happened? Snake, said Blessed. Blue snake. Blessed bit snake. Mr. Zeke said no. Snake squeezed tail. Blessed ran. Looks like he bit it off, Billy observed. No, no, no. Tail's still there, whined Blessed. Squashed. Squeezed hurt. Honestly, it's not there, said Billy. Liar, cried Blessed. Tell Cook. Billy didn't like the sound of the blue snake. He decided to give Mr. Ezekiel a miss. He would go and look for Cook instead. Billy would never forget his 8th birthday. He didn't get a card or a present. He didn't even reach Cook in her kitchen. Something happened on his way there. He was walking across the landing above the entrance hall when the new girl Belle appeared. She came from the small door that led to the music tower. Almost at the same time, Mr. Baldova walked out of the green cloakroom at the other end of the hallway. The girl and the art teacher stared at each other for some time. All at once, Belle said, "Good evening, Samuel Sparks." The art teacher said, "And you are?" "No prizes for guessing who I am," cackled Belle. Her voice was old and deep. "Yolanda," the teacher whispered, as if he was afraid of the name. "Yes." The girl flung out her arms, and as she did this, a veil of gray, like thin smoke, began to swirl around her body. "Now you see me, now you don't," she sniggered. "I can see you, unfortunately," muttered the art teacher. "Sad Samuel. You've come to find your little brother, haven't you? Well, no, you never will." Belle was changing shape. White hairs drizzled into the blonde curls, her pretty features stretched and sagged, and she was growing taller and taller. Now she was an ancient woman with yellow skin that hung in folds beneath her chin and a huge crag of a nose. Billy didn't want to go on watching, but he couldn't help himself. He sank to his knees and peered between the oak railings. Mr. Baldova approached the hag. He pulled something out of his pocket and opened his fist. A cluster of small stones lay in his palm, and gradually they began to glow. And then fierce red sparks flew out of the teacher's hand. Billy gasped, his spectacles slid off his nose, and he only just managed to catch them. The people below were too intent on each other to notice him. "Those won't help you, Mr. Sparks," sneered Yolanda. "Ollie was a wicked boy, and he had to be punished. And now I've got to punish you." "We'll see about that." Mr. Baldova raised his fist and flung the burning stones at the old woman. She screamed as her hair and bits of gray clothing began to smolder. And then, in a deep, chilling voice, she said, "You've done it now." She stared at the teacher. Stared and stared. He took a step towards her and faltered. He took another and stopped. His face was white. His eyes looked frightened and far away. Desperately, he felt in his pocket, searching for more sparkling stones, but he couldn't withdraw his hand. He couldn't move. He seemed almost to have stopped breathing. That'll teach you," said Yolanda. She patted her hair and scorch marks on her dress, and then she turned on her heel and disappeared through the door to the music tower, leaving Mr. Baldova as still and silent as a statue. Suddenly, a loud squeak. A black rat had jumped from Mr. Boldova's pocket and ran across the hall. He began to leap up the stairs, and when he got to the top, he came racing up to Billy. "Help!" squeaked the rat. "Help! Help!" He gazed up at Billy imploringly. "Help Rembrandt!" He wailed. "Help, master!" "I'll try," said Billy. He picked up the rat and walked slowly along the landing. The art master hadn't moved. Billy descended the wide staircase. The burning stones lay scattered across the hall, and Billy had to step between them. The stones were losing their color now. Some were already ash gray like dead coals. Mr. Moldova didn't seem or appear to see Billy. The white-haired boy moved closer and said, "Sir, your rat." He held Rembrandt out to him. "What?" Mr. Moldova stared at Rembrandt. "Ooh, what's that?" "Your rat, sir." "I haven't got a rat." Rembrandt gave a squeak of distress. "Honestly, it's yours, sir. It's called Rembrandt." Mr. Moldova began to move, but he clearly wasn't himself. He turned and walked in the opposite direction. "Take it away," he shouted. "Bin it!" If rats could pass out, Rembrandt would have done just that. As it was, he went quite limp. Billy tucked him under his sweater and ran up to his dormitory. "Gone," muttered the rat as Billy sank on his bed. "What's gone?" said Billy. "Do you mean Mr. B?" "Dead," said Rembrandt. "Light gone out." Billy realized what the rat meant. "You mean his real self, don't you? His soul?" Rembrandt sighed. Billy was so shaken by what he had seen, he couldn't stop shivering. Belle wasn't a girl at all, but an old, old woman. She had changed her shape, but she also had done something terrible to Mr. Moldova. Belle was a hypnotizer, like Manfred Bloor. "Two endowments," Billy murmured. He lay back on his bed and closed his eyes. He wished he could go home and talk to someone, but there was no home to go to. Mr. Ezekiel had promised he would be adopted, but the kind of parents he mentioned had never turned up. "Tell Cook," said a voice. Billy opened his eyes. The rat was sitting on his chest and staring at him. "Tell Cook," the rat repeated. "Cook knows many things." At the mention of Cook's name, Billy realized he was very hungry. He slipped off the bed and, tucking Rembrandt under his sweater, he left the dormitory and made his way downstairs. When he reached the hall, he found that the lights had come on and the burning embers had been removed. It was hard to believe that only an hour ago a battle of shape-shifting and flying sparks had taken place. Billy hurried on towards the dining hall, but as he passed the prefect's room, Manfred Bloor emerged. "Ah, there you are, Billy," said the head boy. "You look startled. Anything been happening?" Billy hesitated. He felt that Belle's shape-shifting was something he shouldn't have seen. No, Manfred." "Nothing to tell me, then." Billy wanted to talk about Belle and Mr. Moldova, but he'd have to mention the rat, and he desperately wanted to keep him. He shook his head. "No." "Nothing? No tidbits about Charlie Bone?" Manfred's coal black eyes glittered. Billy couldn't be hypnotized. He had found this out soon after he had arrived at Bloor's. Manfred had tried to practice his horrible skills on him, but it had never worked. Perhaps it was because of his dark red eyes. "Nothing to report," he said. Manfred looked disappointed. "What's under your sweater?" "My gloves. I was feeling cold." Said Manfred in a mocking voice. "It's my birthday today," said Billy. "Too bad. I haven't got anything for you." Now, if you'd had some news for me, well, I might be able to find a bit of chocolate. Billy loved chocolate, and it was his birthday. All he had to do was tell Manfred what he'd seen and hand over the rat. But what would Manfred do to Rembrandt? Billy gave a small shudder and said, "As a matter of fact, I've had a very boring day." "You're a hopeless case. Did you know that, Billy?" said Manfred scornfully. "Sorry, Manfred." Billy scuttled away from the head boy. "I'm afraid I can't come to your birthday party," Manfred shouted after him. "What birthday party?" Billy muttered as he sped past the portraits, past 3 canteens, and down, down, down into the underground dining hall. And there he found that someone had remembered his birthday. A large iced cake sat at the end of the music table. It had Billy's name on it, surrounded by 8 flaming candles. Billy gasped and took a seat beside the cake. Rembrandt poked his head out of the top of Billy's sweater and said, "Oh my, cake and candles." And then Cook appeared, singing "Happy Birthday" in a high, trembly voice. "Thanks, Cook." Billy blew out the candles and made a secret wish and cut himself a large slice of cake. "You've brought a guest, I see." Cook nodded at Rembrandt. "Where did you find him?" Billy looked at Cook's kind, rosy face, and suddenly it came all pouring out. Blessed's tail, the flying sparks, shape-shifting Belle, and the horrible battle he'd been witness to. Cook wiped her pink brow with the hem of her apron and sat beside Billy. She looked worried, but not surprised. "So, it's her," she muttered. "I knew there was something not right about that girl, but whatever possessed Samuel Sparks to come here?" "He came to find his little brother," Billy told Cook. "Ollie Sparks? Is he still here, then?" Cook seemed very surprised. "Yes, that's what the old woman said. She said no one would ever find him." "Oh my goodness. Where have they hidden the poor boy? I always wondered about him. What's he been eating? If only I'd known." "Do you think they're starving him?" said Billy. "Oh, I hope not, Billy, dear. Oh, dear. What's to be done?" Cook got up and straightened her apron. "I advise you not to eat all that cake, Billy. When you and the rat have had what you want, I'll come and put the rest away for next weekend." As Cook made her way towards the kitchen, Billy called out, "I know people think I'm a spy, but I won't tell Manfred or Mr. Ezekiel what I saw, I promise." Cook turned and looked at Billy. "I'm sure they know already. As for you being a spy, I don't blame you, Billy. One day you'll get the parents you want. If Blors don't see to it, then I will. But right now, I'd better go and find the poor dog that lost its tail." As Cook hurried up the corridor of portraits, a cold draft rushed rushed around her ankles. This meant that the main doors had been opened. She reached the hall in time to see a figure slip through the doors before Mr. Whedon slammed them shut. "Who was that?" asked Cook. "What's it to you?" said Whedon sourly. Cook drew back her shoulders and said, "I asked a civil question. The least you do is give me a civil answer." "Yeah," mocked Whedon. "Hoity-toity." "Are you going to tell me?" asked Cook. "No." Whedon bolted the door shut and walked off. Cook, who was extremely intuitive, knew another victim had been led into a trap, and from what Billy had just told her, she could guess who the victim was. She was right. Mr. Moldova, carrying a suitcase, walked across the courtyard and under the arch between the 2 towers of Blor's Academy. He descended the steps into the cobbled square, and there his gaze was drawn to the fountain of stone swans in the center. The cascade of water glowed gold in the last rays of the sunlight. Mr. Moldova frowned. Why was he here? Where was he going? Who was he? A black car pulled up at the other end of the square. The driver, a gray-haired woman, beckoned to Mr. Moldova. He walked over to her. "Can I give you a lift?" asked the woman. Mr. Moldova scratched his head. "I don't know where I'm going." "I do," said the woman. "I'm clairvoyant. Jump in, Samuel." "I'm not sure." "Do hurry up." "We haven't got all day, have we?" The woman's laughter was cold and shrill. "My name's Eustacia, by the way." Mr. Moldova passed a hand over his eyes. There didn't seem to be anywhere else to go. He walked round the car, got into the passenger seat. There, something he ought to do next, but what? "Forget the safety belt." Eustacia gave another wild laugh, and the car roared off at an alarming speed. At first break on Monday morning, when Charlie and Fidelio were hanging their capes in the blue cloakroom, Billy Raven came in with a bulge under his sweater. The bulge moved, and Charlie asked Billy what he was hiding. "Nothing," said Billy, turning pink. "Oh, come on, Billy." "It can't be nothing," said Fidelio. "It squeaked." Billy was about to deny this when the head of a black rat appeared at the top of his sweater. "That's Rembrandt," said Charlie. "What are you doing with him?" Billy pouted and then mumbled. "Mr. Moldova gave him to me." "I bet he didn't," said Charlie. Billy rushed out and ran along the garden door, Charlie and Fidelio in pursuit. "It's okay, Billy," Charlie called out. "We're not accusing you of anything. That rat's always escaping." Billy didn't stop. He kept on running until he was lost in a sea of bobbing heads. Out of the same sea, two girls came rushing towards the boy. "Something awful's happened," Emma panted. "What?" the boys said together. While Emma gulped for air, Olivia said, "Mr. Moldova's left the school." "He can't have," said Charlie. "He'd have told us." Emma got her breath back. "Exactly. Something awful's happened to him. I just know it, and I've got a horrible feeling those two are responsible." She looked over at Dorcas and Belle, who were sitting on the grass, whispering to each other. Having missed the meeting in the Pets Cafe, Fidelio hadn't had a clue what they were talking about, so the four friends walked around the grounds while Charlie filled Fidelio in. They were soon joined by Gabriel, who announced that he had just seen Billy Raven feeding bits of toast to a black rat. Could it be Rembrandt? "It could," said Charlie. "In fact, it is, and now they say Mr. Moldova's left, but I think something terrible has happened to him." "Something to do with her?" said Gabriel, eyeing pretty blonde Belle, who was now combing her curls. Olivia suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. "If that girl's a shapeshifter, it's going to be hard to know where she is. She should look like anyone." "Or anything," said Fidelio darkly. This thought was so awful they all fell silent. On his way to homework that evening, Charlie caught up with Billy Raven, his arm full of books. "Have you got Rembrandt with you?" Charlie asked. "No, I put him in the dormitory cupboard," Billy said quietly. "I think we'd better find a different place for him," said Charlie. "Matron will hear him scratching, and who knows what she would do if she found a rat in the dorm." Billy shuddered. "He's going to be such a good friend. Already he's told me lots of things I didn't know." "Has he told you why Mr. Moldova left?" asked Charlie. Billy's ruby eyes gazed over the top of his spectacle frames. He shrugged. It occurred to Charlie that Billy might have seen what happened to the art teacher. "You know something, Billy, don't you?" he said. They had reached the tall black doors of the king's room, and ignoring Charlie, Billy pushed at the door and rushed in. His books spilled out of his arms and tumbled on the floor. "Calm down, Billy Raven," Manfred shouted. "What's the hurry?" From her seat between Asa and Dorcas, Belle smiled at the albino. "Don't be mean, Manfred. He's only small," she said. Manfred gave her a surprised look. As Charlie bent to help Billy retrieve his books, he noticed that the small boy's hands were trembling. He was very frightened. Once, 12 endowed children sat evenly spaced at the round table. But gradually their positions had changed, and now there were two distinct groups. Manfred, Asa, Zelda, Belle, and Dorcas sat on one side of the circle, while Lysander, Tancred, Gabriel, Emma, and Charlie sat on the other. Billy was the odd one out. "Sit next to me, Billy," Charlie said softly. Billy gave him a grateful smile and piled his books next to Charlie's. After homework, Charlie kept close to Billy as they made their way to the dormitory. Gabriel caught up with them and, as always, interested in animals, wanted to know what had become of Rembrandt. When he heard that the rat was shut in a cupboard, he suggested they take him to the art room, where Mr. Moldova had kept a large, airy cage. "But can I visit him?" Billy asked. "I don't belong in art." "Of course you can," Gabriel assured him. "I was always in the art room. Just ask her." "Okay." Billy rushed off, and by the time the others had reached the dormitory, he was waiting for them, with Rembrandt under his cape. The art room was on the same floor as the boys' dormitory. It was a vast space with a high ceiling and long windows facing north towards the castle ruin. Easels stood in various positions all around the room, and canvases were stacked 3 or 4 deep against the wall. Rembrandt's cage was in a corner beside the paint cupboard. There was no one in the art room except Emma. She was painting a large white bird flying through a forest. She left the picture to show the boys where Mr. Moldova had kept Rembrandt's food at the bottom of the paint cupboard. When the black rat had been made comfortable with fresh water and plenty of grain, Emma secured the cage door. "I can't stop thinking about Mr. B," she said. "We all miss him in art. He seemed to be, always on our side." Without any warning, tears began to gush down Billy's cheeks. "I know, I know," he sobbed. "I saw." "What did you see?" said Charlie. Billy ran his sleeve across his face and in a frightened, choking voice recounted the terrible events of his 8th birthday. Blessed's tale, the ancient woman who emerged from Belle's body, the flying coals, and the sudden and dreadful stillness that had fallen over the art teacher. "He didn't want Rembrandt," sobbed Billy. "He seemed to have forgotten everything, even who he was." "Hypnotized," Charlie murmured. The others stared at him in horror, and Emma said, "There isn't much that Belle can't do, is there? How old is she? How are we going to help Ollie now?" "Do you know where he is?" asked Billy. Charlie couldn't decide whether to tell him. He was sorry for the small albino, but he had been Manfred's spy. It would be better not to give him too much information until they were quite sure he could be trusted. The others had obviously come to the same conclusion. "No, we don't know where he is," said Gabriel. "I think we better get back to our dormitories now, or Matron will be on a warpath." Billy begged to be given a few more minutes with Rembrandt, and the other 3 left him, crouching beside the cage, squeaking softly at the black rat. Billy stayed talking to Rembrandt much longer than he had intended. When he finally slipped out of the art room, Matron had already called lights out. He tore along the passage, clamping his spectacles to his nose and tripping over his own feet. "Where have you been, Billy Raven?" Manfred stepped out of a doorway, blocking his path. Billy was too scared to lie, but he decided to tell a half-truth. I've been feeding Mr. Boldover's rat, he said. I found him in the passage. I don't think that's true, Billy, Manfred said coldly. It is, said Billy. I think you saw something, Billy. I think you rescued that black rat. When our dear departed art teacher had an accident. No, no. Manfred glowered down at Billy. What did you see? I didn't see anything, mumbled Billy, looking away from Manfred's dreadful black eyes. Liar. You saw what happened to Mr. Moldova, and you told Charlie Bone, didn't you? Billy had a nasty feeling that if he told the truth, it might get Charlie into trouble. No, he said defiantly. I didn't see anything, and I didn't tell Charlie anything. Manfred gave a sigh of irritation. You probably think I'm leaving Blores at the end of term, don't you? Billy hadn't thought about it. He shook his head. All the sixth formers will be leaving. It's the summer term. We have exams to do. That's why I'm rather busy at the moment, but I shan't be leaving. I'll be here, with time on my hands to keep an eye on you. I see, said Billy in a small voice. So you better remember who you're working for, Billy, or you'll never get the nice parents that you want.